The delicate crystal wine glass in my hand trembled, catching and fracturing the warm golden light from my mother's ornate dining room chandelier. It wasn't a tremor of nerves, but the physical manifestation of a cold, sharp fury I was being forced to swallow whole, a bitter pill lodged in my throat. The lively laughter and cheerful chatter that had filled the spacious room just moments before, all in honor of my 26th birthday, had died a sudden, painful death, suffocated by my brother's words. Mark had just finished his toast, but his glass wasn't raised to me. His words were aimed like a well-sharpened dagger directly at my husband, Jake, who sat perfectly still beside me. A real career, a real life. Mark's voice, smooth, confident, and laced with a poison I knew all too well, had cut through the celebratory atmosphere like a knife. But I guess some people are happy just getting by, living paycheck to paycheck. The silence that followed was so heavy it felt like a physical weight on my shoulders, pressing me down into my chair. My mother stared intently at her half-eaten slice of chocolate cake. Her cheeks flushed a deep, embarrassed crimson. My father cleared his throat, a weak, helpless sound that did nothing to break the tension, but only highlighted his inability to control his son. This wasn't a casual, offhand comment. It was a public execution of our dreams, our choices, and our marriage, staged at what was supposed to be a joyful family celebration. Under the crisp white linen tablecloth, Jake's hand found mine. His grip was instantly tight, his skin warm and familiar against my icy, trembling fingers. He gave a small, almost imperceptible shake of his head. His eyes, usually so bright and full of gentle humor, were now dark and serious, pleading with me from across the table. "Don't," they screamed silently. "It's not worth it. Let it go." He was always the peacemaker, the calm in the storm, the one who absorbed the verbal blows and biting remarks to maintain the fragile, illusionary peace of our family gatherings. But Mark, emboldened by the stunned silence and the captive attention, wasn't finished. He leaned back in my parents' expensive upholstered chair, the wood groaning slightly under his weight, and a smug, self-satisfied smirk twisted his lips, revealing the gleaming, perfectly straight teeth my parents had paid a fortune for. "Let's be honest, Amelia," he said, his gaze locking onto me with an unnerving intensity, completely dismissing Jake's presence. "Marrying at 22? Before you'd even started your life, before you had a degree or a career. It was the biggest mistake of your life." He paused, a practiced orator letting his cruel words hang in the air like a thick, toxic smoke. "You'll never be truly successful. Not with that anchor around your neck." I felt the air leave my lungs as if I'd been kicked in the stomach. The word anchor echoed in the silent room, hitting me with the force of a physical blow, and in that moment I saw our future through my brother's eyes, as a ship doomed to the bottom of the ocean. I saw Jake flinch. It was a tiny, almost invisible movement, but I felt it through our connected hands. I saw the tiny muscle in his jaw twitch, the only outward sign of the deep hurt and humiliation he was stoically absorbing. This man who worked 60-hour weeks in the harsh elements, who came home with tired eyes, sore hands, and dirt under his fingernails but never a single complaint, who was patiently, diligently building a future for us with his own two hands and unwavering determination. My vision tunneled until all I could see was my brother's arrogant face, the glint of his ridiculously expensive watch, the smug, permanent set of his mouth, the beautiful herb-roasted chicken, the polite conversation about vacations and politics, the fancy china. It all turned to dust and ash in my mouth, the taste of betrayal overwhelming everything else. This was the moment the fragile, paper-thin piece in our family shattered into a million irreparable pieces, and I knew on a fundamental level that there would be no putting it back together, not like it was before. And I knew with a chilling certainty that settled deep in my bones like ice, that I would never ever forget the sting of this public betrayal. The memory of this birthday dinner would be etched into my mind forever, a scar and a catalyst. My name is Amelia. For my entire 26 years of life, I have lived in the long dark shadow cast by my older brother Mark. He was the golden child, the firstborn son who could genuinely do no wrong in my parents' eyes. When he graduated with his flashy business degree from a prestigious university, my parents presented him with a generous trust fund, a launchpad for his promising career in the high-stakes world of city finance. They spoke of his potential, his intelligence, his ambition with gleaming, uncontainable pride at every family function. When I, just a year later, married Jake, my college sweetheart, a man I'd met in a philosophy class who made me feel seen and loved for who I was, not what I could achieve, I was met with a completely different kind of reception. Quiet disapproval, worried sighs over coffee, and subtle, cutting comments about putting the cart before the horse and not thinking about my future. They saw him as a distraction from a more suitable, more impressive path they had carefully imagined for me. A corporate career, a powerful husband from a good family, a life of country clubs and charity galas. Their love, I learned with devastating clarity that birthday night, felt painfully conditional. A prize to be won based on achievements and life choices that aligned perfectly with their narrow vision, not my own happiness or heart. That night, back in our small, rented one-bedroom apartment that always smelled faintly of the neighbor's strong curry, and the lavender air freshener I constantly sprayed, I didn't cry. The initial shock and searing sadness had been burned away during the tense, silent car ride home, replaced by a solid, burning resolve that felt like a fire had been lit in my chest, warming me from the inside out. Jake held me as I shook, not with sorrow, but with a fierce, determined energy that made my muscles tense. "He's wrong, Mia," Jake whispered into my hair, his voice a low, steady anchor in the storm of my raging emotions. He used his special name for me, the one that always made me feel safe and loved. "I know he is," I said, my voice sounding much steadier and colder than I felt inside, the embers of my anger hardening into diamonds. "And I'm going to prove it. Not for him. Not for them. Not for their approval. For us. For our future." That was the night our quiet, dignified revenge was born. It wasn't about hurting them or proving a point in a loud, dramatic fashion. It was about building something so strong, so stable, so unshakably real, that their words of doubt and dismissal would simply bounce off its solid walls, powerless to break us or our spirit. It was about our future, a future we would design and build on our own terms. Our revenge was a silent, patient, and strategic one. It started the very next morning, with the weak, hopeful light of dawn streaming through our single kitchen window. Illuminating a business plan, we began scribbling on a stack of leftover napkins from the local pizza place on our tiny, formica-topped kitchen table. Jake was a brilliant and highly respected electrician, known throughout his company for his impeccably neat work, his clever, efficient solutions to complex problems, and his unwavering honesty with clients. I had always been naturally good with numbers, organizing complex tasks, and talking to people, making them feel heard and valued. We put our heads together, combining our very different but complementary skills, and saw a clear, obvious gap in the local market. Everyone was starting to want smart homes, integrated lighting, security, music, and climate control. But the existing systems were messy, overly complicated, and required homeowners to deal with multiple, often unreliable and uncommunicative contractors. We envisioned a one-stop shop for high-end, seamlessly integrated smart home installations, a service that was professional, stress-free, and delivered a final product that actually worked beautifully. We spent hours that day brainstorming a name, wanting something that reflected both energy and modern solutions, finally settling on Current Solutions. It felt right, representing both electrical current and the concept of fresh, forward-thinking answers to modern living. For 2 long, grueling, and often disheartening years, we lived on a budget so tight it felt like it could snap at any moment. We ate endless variations of rice and beans, pasta with cheap Jared sauce, and discounted, nearly expired vegetables from the grocery store more times than I could possibly count. I became a master of 100 different ways to cook a single whole chicken, stretching it into meals for nearly a week. Every single extra dollar we earned from Jake's backbreaking overtime or my part-time bookkeeping job for a noisy local accountant was poured directly, and without hesitation, back into the business. We took a terrifying leap and took out a second mortgage on our beat-up 10-year-old sedan, our only vehicle, to buy our first batch of absolutely essential professional-grade tools, testing equipment, and a basic inventory of parts. Meanwhile, Mark flaunted his new, shiny, blood-red sports car, a performance bonus from his latest venture capital job, parking it prominently in my parents' driveway during Sunday visits. At these strained family gatherings, he would deliberately seek me out, a condescending, pitying smile plastered on his face, and ask, "So how's the little wiring business going, Amelia? Managed to not burn any houses down yet? Still playing with extension cords?" I would just smile a thin, tight smile, make a vague pleasantry about keeping busy, and quickly find a reason to walk away, my heart pounding a frantic rhythm of anger and steely resolve in my chest. Our big break, the one that changed everything, came from a man named Mr. Peterson, the weary but determined owner of a struggling but architecturally beautiful boutique hotel on the less fashionable side of town. He was at his wits' end, deeply frustrated with the big impersonal tech firms that had given him confusing, jargon-filled quotes, hidden fees, and terrible, painfully slow service. We heard about his troubles through a friend of a friend and, swallowing our nerves, asked for a meeting. We landed the contract against all odds, because Jake could sit down with him and explain the complex engineering and wiring in simple, clear, confident English, making Mr. Peterson feel confident, understood, and respected. I presented a flawless, meticulously detailed and transparent budget that left no room for nasty surprises, showing him visually and in writing exactly where every single dollar of his investment would go. It was a $150,000 job. The number was so large, so abstractly huge, it made my head spin and my hands tremble visibly when I first typed the quote. It was the biggest project, the biggest risk, and the biggest opportunity either of us had ever seen or even dared to dream of. It felt like we were betting our entire future on a single roll of the dice. The day we signed the thick, intimidating stack of contract papers in Mr. Peterson's temporary office, a sense of overwhelming dread, mixed with wild exhilaration, washed over us. We didn't go out for a fancy dinner to celebrate. The fear of such a monumental responsibility was too overwhelming, too all-consuming. Instead, we went to our favorite cheap burger joint, the one with the sticky vinyl booths, the flickering neon sign, and the familiar greasy smell that somehow felt like home. We sat in our usual corner booth, the red plastic cracked and torn, and ordered our usuals, the weight of the day sitting heavily on our shoulders, a shared burden. There was no celebration champagne, only watery soda in chipped glasses. We just held hands across the sticky table, our fingers laced together tightly, a silent, profound acknowledgement of the huge, daunting mountain we now had to climb together. The pressure was immense, a constant low hum of anxiety in the back of my mind every waking moment. We had bet everything, our meager savings, our only car, our sanity, our future, on this one single chance. Failure in our minds was simply not an option. We had to make this work. There was no other path forward. Completing the hotel job was a monumental, all-consuming task that took over our lives for 6 long months. There were countless problems, of course. Critical shipments delayed by storms, unexpected, ancient wiring issues hidden within the old building's plaster walls, a solid week of torrential rain that halted all outdoor work and threatened our schedule. But we overcame each obstacle together as a team. Jake's technical work was, as always, impeccable, a thing of beauty and precision. My relentless project management and constant communication kept everything moving forward, on schedule and scrupulously within the budget we had promised. Mr. Peterson was absolutely thrilled with the final result, praising our professionalism, our clean, organized work site, and our incredible attention to even the smallest details. That one successful, high-profile job became our very best advertisement, a living portfolio of what we could achieve. It led directly to 3 more substantial commercial contracts within a single year: a new modern office building, a trendy downtown restaurant, and a small but demanding medical clinic. Our reputation for quality and reliability began to grow through genuine word of mouth. We carefully hired our first 2 employees, a careful, skilled electrician named Leo and a bright, organized project coordinator named Maria, people who believed in our vision and work ethic. We finally joyfully moved out of our cramped, noisy apartment and into a small, modest but charming house with a real grassy backyard where we could someday plant a garden and get a dog. The change in our fortune was deliberately invisible to my family, as we consciously chose to live well below our new means. We didn't buy flashy cars or expensive clothes or take lavish vacations. We reinvested every single penny we could spare back into the business. We were building brick by careful, deliberate, strategic brick, a foundation meant to last a lifetime. Mark, however, during this same period, started to show the first real, undeniable cracks in his perfectly polished, glossy life. The easy, flowing venture capital money that had fueled his lavish lifestyle and risky investments began to dry up as the economic climate shifted and the tech bubble he was riding started to deflate. His sure-thing investments in trendy, overvalued tech startups turned out to be not so sure after all, collapsing one after another like a house of cards in a strong wind. At a 4th of July barbecue at our parents' house, he held court on the patio, talking loudly and overconfidently about strategic market corrections and being temporarily overleveraged for aggressive growth. I just listened quietly from my weathered patio chair, slowly stirring my glass of homemade lemonade and watching him carefully. I watched the way his eyes darted around, never quite landing on anyone, the slight, constant tension in his shoulders that his booming artificial voice tried so hard to. His arrogance, I realized with a sudden crystal-clear clarity, was nothing more than a ticking time bomb. He had never learned how to fail gracefully, how to struggle through a real challenge, or how to build something meaningful and lasting from the ground up. His entire career was built on the shifting sands of other people's money and other people's ideas, and without that constant influx of fuel, the engine of his ego was sputtering, choking on its own hubris. The first real, undeniable sign of his deep trouble came from my mom a few weeks later. She called me on a quiet Tuesday evening, her voice thin, strained, and laced with a worry she couldn't possibly hide. She let it slip, almost accidentally, that Mark had asked them for a temporary bridge loan to cover a minor cash flow hiccup. She then confessed, her voice dropping to a guilty, ashamed whisper, that they had already mortgaged their beloved home to the hilt years ago to give him his initial massive startup capital and simply could not help him now. He was so angry with us, she said, her voice trembling with a mixture of fear and sadness, a cold, hard knot of something, pity, foreboding, and a grim, undeniable satisfaction, tightened in my stomach, making me feel slightly nauseous. I felt a strange, conflicting mix of emotions. I was genuinely sorry for my parents' distress and their financial exposure, but I also felt a powerful sense of grim inevitability, a feeling that the universe was finally enforcing a balance. This was not a minor hiccup. It was the beginning of the end for his carefully constructed, glittering world of illusion and debt. Jake and I sat in our comfortable home office one chilly autumn evening, a single brass desk lamp casting a warm, intimate pool of light on the rich, dark wood of the desk. We were looking over the freshly printed year-end profit and loss statement, the columns of numbers telling the story of our last 12 months of relentless work. The final number at the bottom of the page, the net profit, was so significant, so far beyond our most optimistic initial dreams, that I had to read it twice, then a third time, my eyes scanning the digits over and over to make sure I wasn't seeing things, that it wasn't a mirage. I passed the single sheet of paper to Jake, and he did the same, his eyes widening slightly, a slow, deep breath escaping his lips. We were, by any objective definition, successful. Our business was debt-free aside from its own manageable, healthy loans for expansion, and our personal savings account, once a source of constant, low-grade anxiety, was finally, solidly growing into something substantial, a real safety net and a foundation for our future. The silence between us was profound, filled not with emptiness, but with the heavy, wonderful, awe-inspiring weight of what we had accomplished against all odds, against the naysayers, against my own brother's cruel prophecy. We had done it. We had not only climbed the mountain, we had built a solid, beautiful, and welcoming home on its summit, a place where we could finally breathe. The call came on a perfectly ordinary, overcast Tuesday afternoon. I was at my desk in our company's main office, a spacious, renovated warehouse we had moved into 6 months prior, reviewing a complex client proposal for a large residential project, my concentration deep. My personal phone buzzed, vibrating insistently against the polished wood. Mark's name flashed on the screen, stark and unexpected. I stared at it, my heart giving a single hard, painful thump against my ribs. He never called me. Our communication was limited to brief, forced exchanges at obligatory family functions, usually consisting of him offering unsolicited advice and me offering non-committal nods. I hesitated for 3 full, echoing rings, my throat suddenly as dry as dust, before I swiped to answer, pressing the cool glass to my ear. Amelia. Hey, listen. He began, his voice strained, pitched slightly too high, and completely lacking its usual confident, booming baritone. He sounded unsure, almost nervous, a foreign emotion in his vocal repertoire. I was wondering if I could stop by your office tomorrow. There's a time-sensitive business proposition I'd like to discuss with you. My blood ran cold, a visceral shiver tracing its way rapidly down my spine. He had never ever asked to see my office before. He had never acknowledged I even had one, usually referring to it with a dismissive wave as Amelia's little project, or that wiring hobby. The fact that he was now actively seeking me out on my own turf, using the word office, sent a clear, alarming signal that his situation was far more dire than I had even imagined. The next day, I dressed with more deliberate care than I had for any client meeting, choosing my best, most professional navy blue blazer and a pair of sharp, perfectly tailored black trousers. I sat behind my wide, polished oak desk, the one Jake had built for me with his own hands as a surprise anniversary gift, and arranged a fresh, yellow legal notepad and an expensive pen neatly in front of me. Jake stood quietly by the large, floor-to-ceiling window that looked out over our small parking lot and the city beyond, leaning casually but firmly against the frame, a silent, powerful partner in this long-anticipated moment we had both, somehow, always known would eventually come. When Mark walked in, ushered by Maria, I watched his eyes, the windows to his crumbling ego. I saw him take it all in with a slow, sweeping gaze, the sleek computers on our employees' desks, the framed project blueprints and industry awards proudly displayed on the walls, the quiet, efficient, purposeful hum of a real, thriving, legitimate business operating around him. His usual cocky, overbearing confidence was gone, completely erased, replaced by a pale, nervous energy that seemed to vibrate off him. A faint, unmistakable sheen of sweat glistened on his forehead and upper lip, despite the cool, climate-controlled air of the office. He couldn't quite bring himself to look me directly in the eye. Instead, his gaze flitted around the room, from the framed photos of our completed projects to the company logo on the wall, as he launched into a clearly rehearsed speech filled with empty, meaningless buzzwords, ground floor market opportunities, prime real estate plays, unprecedented explosive growth potential. It was all hollow, desperate jargon, a pathetic, transparent echo of the bravado and business speak he'd always wielded like a weapon to assert his superiority. Then he finally stumbled to the point, his words tripping over each other in his rush to get them out. The truth is, Amelia, I need a loan. A substantial business loan. $200,000. He rushed to add, a note of panic in his voice. You'd be fully secured, of course. Top-tier collateral. Absolutely zero risk. The lie was so transparent, so blatantly pathetic, it was almost embarrassing to witness. We both knew with absolute certainty that he had long since run out of any real unencumbered collateral. He was coming to me not as a savvy businessman with a solid proposal, but as a desperate, drowning man, and he was asking me, the sister he deemed a failure, to throw him a life preserver made of solid gold. I let the silence in the room stretch out, thick, heavy, and profoundly uncomfortable. I watched him squirm in the expensive, supple leather guest chair, his eyes darting nervously from the detailed architectural blueprints on my wall to the Small Business of the Year plaque from the local Chamber of Commerce, and back to his own slightly trembling hands resting on his knees. My mind flashed back, vivid and sharp, to that terrible birthday dinner years ago, the clink of crystal, the weight of every judgmental gaze, the specific searing sting of his words. I heard his voice, clear as if he'd just spoken them, saying the word anchor. I felt the memory of Jake's hand squeezing mine under the table, a silent, powerful promise of a better future we would build for ourselves. I leaned forward slowly, placing my hands flat on the smooth, cool surface of my desk, adopting the posture of a CEO assessing a high-risk proposal, not a little sister listening to a family member's plea. My voice when I finally spoke was calm, cool, and lethally professional, the voice of a woman who commanded respect in her own domain. Okay, I said, as if he were any other high-risk applicant walking in off the street. Let's see your formal, detailed business plan, Mark. And I'll need your last 3 years of personal and business tax returns for my financial review. A standard part of our due diligence process. The color drained from his face completely, leaving a ghostly, waxy pallor that was shocking to see. He had no detailed, formal business plan. Just a few scribbled, desperate notes and vague projections on a legal pad that he clutched like a lifeline. He reluctantly, hesitantly, pulled a thin, sad-looking folder from his expensive but now scuffed leather briefcase and handed over his tax returns. A quick, cursory glance at the top page was all it took to see a depressing history of massive, consecutive losses, spiraling, unsustainable debt, and frantic failed attempts to stay afloat in a sea of red ink. The numbers told a story of utter financial collapse and delusion. He began to sputter, his composure cracking like thin ice under a heavy weight. His voice rising with a mix of raw panic and wounded indignation. "This is ridiculous. This is a family matter. You can't treat me like some random stranger off the street. We're blood." I kept my gaze steady, my expression neutral, unyielding. "You came to me for a business loan," I replied, my voice as cold and hard as a diamond, each word chosen with precision. "This is business. My business. And I have a fiduciary responsibility to my company and its future not to lend a significant amount of capital without a viable plan and a demonstrable history of financial responsibility." I was quoting almost verbatim the very principles of sound investment that our parents had always praised him for, the principles he had claimed to live by. He slammed his open hand down on the solid surface of my desk with a loud, sharp crack, the sudden violent noise making me jump involuntarily. The pen on my notepad rattled and rolled onto the floor. "After everything I've done for this family, the prestige I've brought, the success I've achieved, this is how you thank me? This is how you treat your own brother?" The mask was fully off now, shattered into 1,000 pieces on the polished concrete floor. This was the real, raw, unfiltered Mark, entitled, arrogant, and cornered, lashing out like a wounded, dangerous animal who saw the trap closing. From his post by the window, Jake took a single, deliberate, and purposeful step forward. He didn't say a word, didn't need to. His presence in the room, his quiet, solid strength, suddenly became huge, palpable, and intensely protective. Mark's eyes flickered toward him, and he visibly flinched, taking a subconscious half-step back as if physically pushed by the force of Jake's silent, unwavering, and judgmental stare, the fight momentarily draining out of him under that calm, powerful gaze. I stood up, my posture straight and strong, feeling the full height and power of the capable, resilient woman I had fought so hard to become. I looked my brother directly in his frightened, angry eyes, forcing him to see me, to truly see the person he had patronized, belittled, and underestimated for so many years. "You stood up at my birthday dinner in front of our parents, our family, and our friends and told me with absolute certainty that I would never be successful." I began, my voice clear, unwavering, and filling the quiet, tense room with its resonance. "You called my husband the kindest, most decent, and hardest working man I have ever known, an anchor. You belittled every single sacrifice we made, every skipped meal, every meal of rice and beans, every late night spent working, every moment of doubt we pushed through, while we were slowly, painstakingly building this." I gestured around the office, this physical, tangible testament to our sweat, our tears, our partnership, and our triumph. "So no, I will not give you a loan. Not as your sister, and certainly not as a businesswoman." I paused, letting the stark, final truth of the words sink into the space between us, a chasm he had dug himself. "The risk," I concluded, my gaze never leaving his, "is far too high." I was using his own language, the cold, hard, unfeeling language of business and risk assessment he had always revered, to hold up a mirror to his own catastrophic failure and profound miscalculation. The poetic justice of the moment was so perfect, so complete, so beautifully symmetrical, it almost took my breath away. He was being denied not out of petty revenge or lingering childhood resentment, but because of his own demonstrable, documented lack of planning, his own proven, staggering arrogance, his own clear history of financial irresponsibility and failure, the very flaws he had always so confidently projected onto me and Jake, the very shortcomings he had accused us of. The tables had turned not because I had pushed them over in a fit of rage, but because he had been sawing away at his own legs for years, blind to the coming collapse. He hadn't been brought down by us. He had built his own elaborate, gilded prison, brick by heavy brick, with his own pride, his own unsustainable choices, and his own profound sense of entitlement. We were merely the ones standing calmly at the locked door, holding the key he so desperately wanted and needed, and we were consciously, deliberately choosing not to turn it. We were the living, breathing, thriving proof that his entire worldview, his hierarchy of success, was fundamentally, tragically flawed. He stared at me, his mouth slightly agape, his eyes wide with a dawning, horrifying comprehension, and for the very first time in our lives, I saw him truly see me. Not as his little sister, the one he could patronize, bully, and dismiss, but as an equal, as a peer, as a successful, respected CEO who held his future in her hands. The victor in a race he hadn't even known we were running, a race he assumed he had already won by default. The shock and dawning, absolute horror in his eyes, the slow-motion realization of his own utter and complete defeat, not just financially but morally and personally, was the final missing piece of a puzzle I hadn't even known I was trying to solve. It wasn't a feeling of gloating or vicious triumph, but of a long, deep, and emotionally draining chapter finally, definitively, irrevocably closing. He turned on his heel, his shoulders slumping in a way I'd never seen before, a posture of pure defeat, and walked out of the office he had been forced to acknowledge was real, legitimate, and thriving without another single word. The soft, definitive click of the door closing shut behind him was louder, more final, than any dramatic slam could have ever been. He didn't speak to me or even acknowledge my presence for a full, quiet year. There were no angry phone calls, no pleading texts, no awkward, forced encounters at Christmas because he pointedly did not come, choosing to spend the holiday with friends, or so my mother claimed, her voice heavy with disappointment. I heard snippets of the grim news through the reluctant, hushed family grapevine, from my mom who sounded increasingly tired and sad, mourning the son she thought she had and the fractured state of her family. He had been forced to sell his huge, showy house in the prestigious neighborhood and his beloved status symbol sports car, the very emblems of his success. He moved into a small, plain two-bedroom apartment in a generic complex across town, and in what must have been the ultimate humiliation for him, took a salaried middle management job at a firm he would have once considered beneath him, a fact that was relayed to me with a sense of stunned, bewildered shock. His downfall was complete, comprehensive, and it was authored entirely by his own hands, from the first arrogant signature on a risky deal to the last desperate plea in my office. We didn't celebrate his misfortune. We didn't speak his name in triumph. We just quietly, gratefully continued living our lives, growing our business, nurturing our marriage, and cherishing the hard-won peace and self-respect we had earned through our own effort. Last week, Jake and I stood side by side on the dusty, bustling, active construction site of our newest and most ambitious project to date. It was a full building automation and security system for a brand new 50-unit luxury condo development, a project that was literally changing the city's skyline. We wore identical white hard hats and scuffed steel-toed boots, the uniform of our shared success. A strong, fresh wind whipped my hair across my face and tugged insistently at the large set of blueprints I was holding. I looked out at the growing skeleton of steel and glass, then at the vibrant city sprawling beyond it, and finally at Jake standing solidly beside me, whose eyes were crinkling at the corners with a quiet, deep, shared pride that needed no words. There was no gloating, no cheering, no need to say "I told you so" to the empty air. Just a deep, profound, and settled peace that warmed my soul from the inside out, a feeling of rightness, of arrival. We had built this life, this business, this unbreakable partnership, with our own hands, our own minds, and our own hearts from the very ground up. Together. I realized then, standing in the wind on that high floor, the city at our feet, that the best revenge, the only revenge that truly mattered, wasn't the single powerful satisfying word no. It wasn't watching him fail from a distance or seeing him finally humbled. The best revenge, the most powerful, lasting, and nourishing kind, was simply this life. This beautiful, messy, challenging, and incredibly rewarding life we had created for ourselves. A life built on a foundation of mutual respect, backbreaking hard work, personal integrity, and a profound, enduring love that was never an anchor, but the very engine, the driving, powerful current, of my success and our shared happiness. It was the love for my husband that my brother had mocked so cruelly that gave me the strength to begin, and the love for the life we were building together day by day, that gave me the strength to keep going, no matter the obstacles. And the most empowering part of it all, the thought that made a genuine, peaceful smile spread across my face as I turned back to the complex site plans in my hands. We had done it all without ever compromising who we were, without sacrificing our values or our kindness. We had succeeded, truly and lastingly, without ever becoming anything like him.